truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, October 17th, 2024, the 1,367th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you'll get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the free version on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by checking the show notes or visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. Okay, so the big story of the morning was Kamala Harris appearing on Fox News last night with host Bret Baier for an interview. She went into unfriendly or even enemy territory. The interview was so bad for Kamala Harris that it seemed like it must have been intentional, maybe by both sides. That is, unless you're listening to the Kamala-friendly media, and then it was a masterful performance. She was bold, brave, and confident in the face of gotcha question after gotcha question, interruption after interruption. As you'll hear, what made Bret Baier so tough is that he acted like any mainstream journalist acts with Donald Trump. Recall that Bloomberg interview from Tuesday.
Just named all these things.
President Trump, the issue, the markets are looking at the fact you are making all these promises. Latest one was car loans. You're flooding the thing with giving giveaways.
But we're going to grow.
I was actually quite kind to you. I used 7 trillion. The upper estimate is 15 trillion. People like the Wall Street Journal, who's hardly a communist organization,
yeah, but you don't know.
They have criticized you on this as well. You are running up enormous debts.
What does the Wall Street Journal know? I'm meeting with them tomorrow. What does the Wall Street Journal know? They've been wrong about everything. So have you, by the way. You've been wrong about
You're trying to turn this. You're trying to turn this.
You've been wrong about
You're trying to turn this into debate. There are
it's
business people.
But you're wrong.
People.
You've been wrong all your life on this stuff. You've been wrong. Now, let me tell you about currency. You're going jumping a lot of.
People saw that interview. There were viral moments all throughout that interview. We went through some of those on the live stream yesterday. So if you are a paid subscriber, check that out. If you're not a paid subscriber, that's how to do it. But that man, John Micklethwaite, the very refined British man, came in with the intent to make Donald Trump look bad. Instead, he made himself look bad. He spent an hour interrupting the president, trying to refute him with statistics made up by global regime economists and very sophisticated arguments that appear in mainstream newspapers. Now, of course, Donald Trump is used to absolutely all of that behavior. That's how basically all of his interviews go. The rules don't matter when the subject is Donald Trump. The goal of the media is to take Trump down. They are supposed to act as hostile toward Donald Trump as possible. We've watched it now for 9 years. People who don't know anything pretend that Donald Trump doesn't know anything, as if the people they follow on Twitter, their fellow quote-unquote journalists, have better access to good information than the President of the United States. And the funny thing is, most of them probably realize that they're being fed information from intelligence agencies or former intelligence agents, and they just simply succumb to the mythology about the intelligence agents being the most informed people in the world, rather than people who are just making up stories that the news will disseminate, that people will believe, and upon believing it, it will guide their action. They'll do the work from that point on, creating the world in whatever way they're instructed to respond to whatever crisis or trauma has been presented by the news from the intelligence agency. But they believe they just have inside info. We've watched this dynamic for 9 years. We see it one-on-one. We see it in the debates. We saw it nonstop in the White House press briefing room throughout COVID. Donald Trump, the president of these United States with the best access to information in the world, was being ignored and mocked by gender studies majors who were willing to do whatever Anthony Fauci told them to do. And people went right along with it. They were like, well, Anthony Fauci, he's been in medicine or whatever it is he does for like 60 years. Donald Trump is just an orange reality show star. Well, okay, commies. You were the one wearing 2 masks in your car and injecting yourself with a toxic experimental substance that can't protect you from a disease that couldn't kill you. We're the ones who didn't do that. Hostility is now expected for Donald Trump. Hostility from journalists is how they virtue signal to other journalists. It's how they virtue signal to elites. Everybody wants to see Donald Trump taken to task on television at every opportunity. If you give him an easy ride, well, you're basically a traitor. It's their job to take him down. There used to be standards for that. And in the last 24 hours, they've tried to bring that standard back. But have they really brought it back, or are they just applying it differently? Oh, yeah, it's one of those double standards. And we'll get into the Kamala interview in a second. But Donald Trump went on the Patrick Bet David podcast. I think they recorded it yesterday. It came out this morning. And Donald Trump addressed that appearance before the Economic Club of Chicago.
I think the one thing they don't show, you were talking yesterday I think it was the Bloomberg event, which, by the way, I loved. Yeah. I love the way you handled the whole terrorist conversation. That was a great event.
I got hoodwinked to go on that. You know, I was supposed to make a speech in front of the Chicago Economic Club, which is a big deal, you know, which is a very prestigious place, beautiful. Everything was beautiful. And all of a sudden, I understand I'm being interviewed by this gentleman. And he's got a reputation for being about, I'd love to see him do Kamala. He should do Kamala. That would be beautiful. But he's a tough cookie, and he's the chairman of Bloomberg. He's a big. All of a sudden, I'm being interviewed, and I wasn't happy about it because I found out that he is, his reputation precedes him. And but I decided to do it. You have a choice: walk out and don't do it and have a scandal, or go in and do it and hopefully win, or you go in and do it and you get killed, which is probably the worst. But it was a great interview, actually. And he was nasty, but he wasn't overly nasty to me. I mean, other people thought he was. I thought nastier was David Muir when he kept interrupting me during the debate.
So Trump says he wasn't even supposed to be interviewed at that event at the Economic Club of Chicago by the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg. They hadn't set that up in advance. Trump was just supposed to show up and give his economic speech that he's given a couple of times before in New York, in Detroit. He's gotten wonderful receptions in both instances. I know that at least in New York, he took questions at the end. But giving a speech and sitting down for a hostile interview are two totally different things. And so the day before, Trump presents a template of having to sit for an obviously hostile interview, and in his case, one he didn't even know he'd be sitting for. But let's talk Kamabla. Within the normie within the Con Inc. media bubble, throughout the mainstream media, and around the intellectual kids table over on Twitter, this interview is a very big deal. Everybody is now saying Kamala is done. Trump is definitely going to win. This isn't a close race anymore. And you'll remember, if you tuned into the live stream yesterday, during the day, Bret Baier said that this is the tightest race ever. A very close race, a very real campaign leading up to a very real election. It could not be closer. Let's see what happens. You might remember seeing the exact same dynamic play out when the fake president Joe Biden was still pretending to run in this fake campaign leading up to the fake election. And then he had the debate with Donald Trump. And immediately after that, Joe's numbers tanked and Joe was gone. We're seeing the exact same dynamic at work with the Kamala interview by Bret Baier, but that is not how people are discussing it because they are pretending we are in a very tight race, in a very real campaign, leading up to a very real election that's about to decide the future of absolutely everything. Now, if you have not yet become battle-hardened enough to stave off the groveling and trembling of the average standard issue villager over who the television might say is your next God King, then last night was probably a very big deal. Kamala Harris so bold and so brave to go into the enemy territory of her own controlled opposition. Her 18 supporters and everyone on multiple TV networks was really happy to see that Kamala gave it the old college try. Look how hard she tried in the face of an impossible situation. Everything was lined up against her, including probably systemic racism. And she answered all the questions. That's what the TV tells us now. She answered all the questions. Why do they do that? Since that's the absolute lowest possible bar anyone could ever hope to cross in an interview. In fact, without crossing that bar, it's actually not an interview. An interview is about asking questions and those questions being answered. But they do this because they like to be able to say that anyone who doesn't give them the answers they attempt to corral people into giving is not actually answering their questions. Donald Trump, for instance, won't answer their questions in their terms according to the parameters they've laid out. And to them, that means he's not answering questions. In reality, he's just not answering them the way the communists in the mainstream media want him to answer. And we had something of a mirrored version of that last night in the interview with Bret Baier. Kamala Harris tried to get through one of her talking points after another, all of her memorized slogans and phrases. She wanted to hit all her emotional moments. And because none of that actually constitutes an answer to the question, Bret Baier kept interrupting her and not letting her give those answers. And so now that's the mortal sin. Kamala Harris wasn't actually going to answer Bret Baier's questions by the terms and standards they hold Donald Trump to. She was there to recite talking points and slogans so that the chattering class on television after the interview ended could talk about all the important things she brought up, like they do every time. It doesn't matter if she tells the truth. Doesn't matter if she makes a convincing argument. It just matters if she brings up certain subjects they care about. I thought it was really important that she brought up race there. I thought it was really important that she brought up abortion. I thought it was really important that she brought up the opportunity economy she wants to create in America and how much better that will make people's lives. I thought it was really important that she talked about all those things. How about you, Joy Reid? Oh, I thought it was really important that she brought up that border bill they were trying to pass. Trump stopped that. If Trump hadn't stopped that, this border thing wouldn't be a problem. And I think it was really important she made that point. These people are insane. We're in an upside-down, bizarro world. So let's go through a bit of this interview. But before we do, it's worth noting that this interview was pre-taped, so it could have been edited. And apparently Kamala Harris showed up late for the interview, so they couldn't get the amount of time they were supposed to have. The story and the surface interpretation of this is that Bret Baier had every right to feel offended. That would be ridiculous if Kamala Harris was a real vice president, but since she's not, and she's the one who desperately needs the exposure, you'd think she'd be acting more professionally. It's not like she has important things to do. This is her whole thing. Before the interview started, Bret Baier went through a couple of the big headlines of the day, updating people about Israel and Iran and how the markets were doing. And of course, he was setting the tone. He was framing the interview. They do that to give the impression that they're just doing hard news during that time. So these are the true things that you have to believe and keep in the back of your head while you watch this interview. Now, it's classless and underhanded, and it's a fake news trick that's been effective for a long time. But it's also one of the things that makes me wonder if this interview wasn't intentionally packed with all of the tricks they attempt to use against Donald Trump all the time. Because they certainly went through all of them. It was clear they were attempting a takedown, and the response by the media afterward suggests coordination of that messaging. Here's how things started. Listen to how quickly they get contentious. Or as every media outlet today has said, testy.
Voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but do you, just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Bret, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border.
And she keeps going. At no point was there an answer to Bret Baier's question. She pretended the question didn't exist. There was no way she was going to give that answer, because any number that she could have given that would even be in the ballpark of something that could be taken seriously would make the fake administration look terrible. Now, she clearly doesn't know anything. Again, those are all talking points and slogans that she uses in her stump speeches, during the media appearances she's now doing, having not really bothered for the first 2 months or so, as well as in the debates. Everything is always in reference to the work they are doing or the work they intend to do. Answering questions in a real way is not necessary in a joy-based, vibes-based campaign. Kamala's not there to prove she understands things. She's not there to explain things. She's not there to tell you how any of this could ever help you. She's there to advertise an agenda to you. Now, it's not her agenda. She didn't come up with it. And the agenda she states is not even the agenda that was pursued while she was pretending to be fake vice president. It's just a sales pitch. It's advertising to the American consumer a sort of vague imagining of a lifestyle, a character they might possess if they get on board and support Kamala Harris. We are the people who care deeply about immigration and immigrants. And if you want to be a person who cares deeply rather than being a racist, you'll cast your fake vote for a lady that pretends to be black. Another interesting moment on the topic of immigration.
It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungari, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday, campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Bret.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions.
Now, everyone can be their own judge of whether or not Kamala Harris sounded sincere in that expression of sympathy for this mother who lost her young daughter. But again, there wasn't any answer there. She simply blamed Donald Trump once again for somehow killing their border bill. We are supposed to pretend it's a good bill because it was bipartisan, and it even included some of the most quote-unquote conservative members of the Republican Party. Now, should we take that to mean neoconservative or actual conservative? Because the negotiations didn't seem to feature anyone who actually cared about solving the problem, who actually cared about closing the border. Under that bill, they could still allow 5,000 illegal aliens a day to invade the country. The question was whether or not the Biden-Harris illegitimate administration owed an apology to the family of these young girls who are reported to have been killed by illegal aliens. But she went right back to Trump because Trump was not willing to participate in a solution. It sounds like they were attempting to negotiate with Trump and Trump didn't want to negotiate with them. That's awfully strange because Donald Trump's not president, right? I mean, that's what I've been told. Joe Biden is a real president and always has been, even though no one believes he's president right now. And people are realizing it's kind of been like that the entire time. It's impossible to reconcile those things unless you're a conspiracy theorist, you see. Joe Biden's a real president, just like Kamala Harris is a real vice president. They're not just the people who were stood up by the global regime to present a premise of legitimacy, an illusion of legitimacy for the evil twin faction in the United States, the Uniparty. They're a real administration, not just some treasonous usurpers who are protected by propaganda and censorship and lawfare and economic warfare. Why are they blaming that deal falling apart on Donald Trump? What did he have to do with it? He wields that much power over the Republican Party? Let's continue.
This is a time when voters, especially here in Pennsylvania, are inundated with commercials and ads. They just want it to stop because it's every commercial. But many of them add noise, but a few of them seem to break through. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing, stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what? You got to take responsible for what happened
presidency.
in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think it's real. He spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters because he actually has no plan in this election that is about focusing on the needs of the American people. Whereas, at $20 million on that ad, on an issue that, as it relates to the biggest issues that affect the American people, it's really quite remote. And again, his policy was no different. Look at where we are, though. On plans for the American people, I'm offering a plan to deal with affordable housing. I'm offering a plan to deal with
And blah, blah, blah. She goes on back into that never-ending loop of catchphrases and buzzwords and slogans and talking points. Everything in relation to Donald Trump, as though somehow Donald Trump actually supports those policies that Kamala came out and supported. Donald Trump makes it very clear all the time that he is not supporting any part of the communist gender agenda that is straight from, by the way, Weimar Germany. It actually has a history that far predates even that. And if this is a subject that interests you, I strongly recommend going to prussiagate.substack.com and searching for the Urania series, Urania. The gender derangement is part of a regime plan that has been around for literally thousands of years. But I want to focus on the answer she gave. She said, I will follow the law. And that was the second time in the interview she used that. Bret Baier asked her if she still supported things she supported 5 years ago, like allowing immigrants into the country, allowing them to apply for driver's licenses, to qualify for free tuition, to be enrolled in free health care. And Kamala said she would follow the law. And in the abstract, that's actually a fine answer for someone who wants to be president to give. The Congress makes the laws. The president is not supposed to be making laws. Our politics have just become so distorted. And the fake government layered on top of the constitutional republic we may have once known is tasked with centralizing power. If you want to be president of the bureaucracy, you had better be prepared to advertise every single part of that agenda. And because they have created the illusion that the president is some kind of monarch, uniparty candidates have to pretend they're going to go out there and get all of these things done, even though many of the things they promise are things they can't do. Unless, of course, they intend to defile their office and abuse their power. And Kamala Harris, of course, is like a round 2 of Barack Obama, so we can expect that's exactly what she intends. I will follow the law in the abstract is not a bad answer, but we're not in the abstract. We're in reality where our entire country is run by an administrative bureaucracy lousy with communists. And when that's the case, I will follow the law is meaningless. She was presented with her own words from a few years ago when she supported the government paying for gender transition surgeries for inmates in federal prisons under the assumption that it's based on a medical need. And it's funny, I think people have this weird impression that they're only doing this for prisoners. It's not that. It's that they're already paying for gender transitions and they want to make them available for prisoners too. It's meaningless to say you're going to follow the law if you intend to change the law. Why is she afraid to answer that question? Aren't the communists in the right about this one? Aren't we the terrible transphobes? We're told it's politics and she can't afford to turn anyone off with her answers, especially not when it's in favor of such a small minority of people. But isn't this a grave moral concern? Don't we want a president who would take a principled moral stand on such an important issue, even knowing they'd be facing tremendous backlash as a response? If Kamala believes in transformer rights, why can't she just say it? She's already said she supports it. She tells us over and over again that she's been very clear. She's been very consistent. Sure, she's changed her views and changed her policies, but something about her values has been consistent the whole time. Her values being consistent the whole time is something she's been consistent about saying. It just hasn't been consistently true. Her answer in this case, I will follow the law, is a cop-out. Her answer is actually yes. She just wants someone else to take the responsibility for it, or better yet, she wants no one else to take the responsibility for it. It will just be the disembodied bureaucracy that we can hold accountable if one day we win enough fake, rigged elections to put some people in there who might fire them. That's our solution, and any decade now, we might achieve it. Thank goodness we've remedied all those election problems since 2020, am I right? Things get even more testy here.
It's interesting you said turn the page, Madam Vice President. You were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden?
during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I know.
And so that would be one change in terms of, but also I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders, including my plan for a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and for small businesses, extending the tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000.
We've heard a lot about those plans in recent days. Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. Rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American president, which is one who understands that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us.
They're just swapping out the old brand for the new brand. From their perspective, that is all they are doing. I'm not Joe Biden. I'm Kamala Harris. I'm a strong woman of various minority ethnicities. I wear really expensive jewelry, but somehow the same pantsuit for the last 4 years. I've got a whiny, nasally voice, and I use vocal fry to make it seem like I have real emotions. I cackle because I have no personality and don't know what's funny. I have no real accomplishments, and I've achieved my prominence through corruption, compromising behavior, and a willingness to whore myself to the highest bidder, even if it's one of our foreign adversaries. Oh, wait, that sounds way more like Joe Biden than I thought it would. This would be like replacing Coca-Cola with New Coke, except for the fact that nobody really likes Joe Biden and people liked Coca-Cola Classic. The regime understood that the people demanded a replacement, and so they gave us the thing that everyone had already expressed not liking. How is she going to be different than Joe Biden? What do you mean? She is different than Joe Biden. They've rebranded the agenda to appeal to entirely different demographics. Kamala Harris is young and vibrant and hip and cool. She's Kamala, despite having no children. She is simply a different delivery mechanism for the advertising that supports the global regime's agenda in the United States. But they keep going.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
that is
tell
about turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
but
people
you're the
have
lever
become.
of power.
But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president, one, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning and engaging in personal grievances and it being about him instead of the American people. People are tired of that.
So despite being fake vice president for the last 3.5 years and pretending to be in control of this country, what Kamala Harris promises is a turning of the page. A turning of the page from what and to what? That's the question. She answers that we need to turn the page on the rhetoric of the last 9 years. The contentiousness, I guess, that is expressed and stoked by members of the Uniparty and all the institutions in our country over which they have power, all the institutions in the world over which they have power. The business leaders, for instance, in partner organizations of the World Economic Forum, leaders of the big tech companies, academia, the donor class and the political party apparatus, the scientists, the public health community and big pharma, the global governing bodies and the NGOs and the military-industrial complex. You can just go on and on. All of those people are very, very upset about Donald Trump being part of the conversation. And they blame all of this on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the one that is making everything so contentious. It's Donald Trump's rhetoric. It's not the regime's agenda that Donald Trump is exposing. It's the things he says about the regime that make people upset. And that's what we need to turn the page from. We need to turn the page from Donald Trump and his supporters. That's what she's pitching. But they've been pitching that for pretty much all of those 9 years. As soon as Trump came down the escalator and gave his speech, he was immediately the sort of racist that Barack Obama had been trying to turn the page from for the 8 years prior. Somehow our first black president wasn't able to do that. And ever since Trump was inaugurated, they have been trying to take him out while causing his supporters to suffer until they simply give up. They've been trying to turn the page the entire time. It just hasn't worked because people don't actually want to turn that page. The page that people want to turn is the one in the big book that says Uniparty on the cover. She's not speaking for the American people. She's not even speaking to the American people. She's speaking to a small and dwindling cadre of checked out, brain dead, heavily vaccinated communists and a class of global elites and wannabe elites, all of them facing existential crises. She is speaking to their panic. They will legitimately accept anything that makes Donald Trump and his supporters go away. And I don't think that case even needs proving. Think about what they said should happen to us when we weren't going along with their vaccine mandates. They've staged coups and color revolutions. They've allowed an invasion of the country. They're waging fake foreign proxy wars. They're censoring the American people and using economic warfare against them. The only people any of this resonates with are the people inside their bubble, which is kind of the fatal flaw of all hate movements. Everyone outside the bubble is too hated to ever be listened to or even be taken seriously. And inside the bubble, everything is justified through hatred of those outside. You can't actually sell that to anyone outside the bubble, not anymore. And the number of people inside the bubble is shrinking. Let's continue.
People are tired of that.
If that's the case, why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk.
So are they misguided, the 50%? Are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
No one who is not addicted to the uniparty left brand of the central narrative would ever believe something like that. Donald Trump has made this case for 9 years now, and everyone who has bothered paying attention has figured out that he is right. But that's not even necessary. You can just listen to the clip they're all freaking out about from the interview on Sunday with Maria Bartiromo. We went through that on Monday's show. Trump is talking about protecting the elections with the National Guard or the military because of BLM Antifa and other far-left lunatics and the politicians who are actually traitors to this country, like Adam Schiff. He's not talking about turning the military on the American people. And it's ridiculous to even consider when the fake and illegitimate government is weaponizing whatever pieces of the federal bureaucracy they're still able to control against the American people. Kamala is intentionally misstating who Donald Trump is referring to, and Bret Baier corrects her by showing one of Trump's answers at a town hall he did for women selected by Fox News to participate in the town hall.
Question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that
specific... No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you.
That was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes. Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You call Donald Trump...
the significance of that.
Now that right there is quite a performance. Kamala's getting pretty riled up. She doesn't understand why Bret Baier isn't as scared of the boogeyman the communists have turned Donald Trump into as the rest of the people she usually talks to. Usually she goes through this part of her script and whoever she's talking to is agreeing as hard as he or she or they or she or her possibly can. They're like, oh, you said those things about Donald Trump. I've heard those things about Donald Trump, too. In fact, I say those things about Donald Trump. Therefore, we all agree. Thank you for giving such a concise answer to that question. I agree with your emotion. I can tell that you are willing to take Donald Trump to task. Finally, someone has come along willing to do that. I'm sure it'll work this time. Kamala's all fired up. Let's see if she can stick the landing.
He's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable?
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room, and he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
after George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community have all spoken out, even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again, including his former vice president, which is why the job was open for him to choose another running mate. So that is a fact. That is a fact.
That's not really a fact. But we can leave that aside. The question was, if you say Donald Trump is unstable and unhinged and misguided and he's all these evil things, even though half of the country supports him, truthfully a lot more than that, if you're able to judge all of these things, spending virtually no time around Donald Trump whatsoever, and to assume that Kamala's not lying, you'd also have to assume that she's never seen a Donald Trump speech. She can assess Donald Trump as mentally unfit and unhinged and unstable. How is it possible that she was not aware of Joe Biden's mental decline while having meetings with him over the course of 3.5 years? And I got to say, this is one of those moments where I'm a little sad that you can't just see this video right now, because Kamala's face just drops as soon as that question is asked. Her body language is terrible throughout the interview. She's insecure. She's caught off guard. She doesn't have the ability to give good answers or honest answers, and she tries to emote her way through. It was a pitiful display throughout, unless you are a certain kind of person with a certain set of priorities. For the people who support Kamala Harris, whether they are prominent globalists or purple-haired cat ladies who can't stop picking at their skin, they got more of what they can't stop demanding, even though it's the thing that's destroying them. They got more of Kamala Harris blaming everything on Donald Trump. That's their only strategy. That's what Kamala Harris is tasked with doing, and she goes out there and she does it. Kamala Harris is basically a cackling billboard meant to put a sense of authority and confidence behind what is said all day long by the mainstream media. She's just one wall of the echo chamber. The interview was finally cut at 26 minutes. The reports are that Kamala's handlers were basically waving their arms at Bret Baier saying, "That's it." Baier acknowledges that at the end of the interview and then discusses it on Fox News afterward. So she got there late, she cut the interview off early, and you heard the answers. It couldn't have gone worse. It was very, very similar to Joe Biden's debate performance, and it fills the same role, narratively speaking. Let's go through some of the reaction. Here is Van Jones.
I thought Kamala Harris did a magnificent job. First of all, I now hope Donald Trump will go on MSNBC and talk to Rachel Maddow, okay? Because that is very tough to do when you're on unfriendly territory. She went there. It was rude from the beginning. It was disrespectful from the beginning. He was talking over her. He was clearly not there to ask questions. He was trying to attack her on behalf of Donald Trump.
Now, he may have been rude and disrespectful if Kamala Harris was a real vice president, but of course she's not. And it may have been rude and disrespectful if that sort of thing wasn't standard industry behavior, but of course it is. Donald Trump gave Kamala Harris the sort of interview that Donald Trump has gotten in virtually every mainstream interview for 9 years. So it's hard to complain that that's not fair game. I don't like conversations like that, but until we've moved beyond this phase and people actually want to take things seriously again and actually hear the truth and actually try to solve problems, this is where we're going to be. But I was more interested in the fact that Van Jones thinks Bret Baier did this on behalf of Donald Trump. Bret Baier has been no friend of Donald Trump. Fox News has been no friend of Donald Trump. Bret Baier's approach might have been designed to make Kamala Harris look bad. That may well have been an intentional takedown, but it wasn't on behalf of Donald Trump, because the real battle isn't Trump versus Kamala. It's Trump versus the uniparty. It's Trump versus the regime. Bret Baier could have simply been taking Kamala Harris down on behalf of the uniparty right. And as we'll see in a few minutes, the uniparty left seems to be on board with it. Let's get some further derangement from MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell.
Bret Baier himself personally lied. Bret Baier lied deliberately and knowingly about what Donald Trump has said he wants to do to the Americans he calls the enemy within, which includes everyone watching this program right now. It includes our first guest. It includes everyone working in this building. As Donald Trump has defined it so far, it includes every one of the 81 million people who voted for Joe Biden and will probably vote for Kamala Harris. That's the enemy within, according to Donald Trump. And Bret Baier lied about that. When he showed a clip of Donald Trump, he chose to show not the video of what Donald Trump actually said, but he showed instead, knowingly and corruptly, a ridiculous tape of Donald Trump on the Fox network earlier today, claiming that he was never threatening anyone and laughing about it. And Bret Baier took that to be a fact, that Donald Trump never threatened anyone. That is the kind of Trump campaign operative junk that Bret Baier sullied himself with and was throwing into his interview with the vice president tonight. And the vice president very forcefully responded.
Lawrence O'Donnell is trying to exile Bret Baier from the party of false decorum. He has sullied himself. He lied. And Kamala, the strong, brave, competent, and potentially black woman, she rose above all of it. Honestly, she's an inspiration. Elon Musk had a different take on it. He posted on X, formerly Twitter, that the interview was funnier than any parody. Trump's right-hand man, Dan Scavino, said, wow, that entire Kamala interview with Bret is an ad. And I assume that must be a euphemism. He can't possibly mean that the whole thing was actually just a piece of advertising, staged and filmed and disseminated, meant to convince the consumer to invest in a certain brand, a certain image, a certain lifestyle. That's not what he meant. He just meant the interview was filled with so many bad segments that they could make one elongated Trump ad out of all of it. He could never be serious that the whole thing is actually just an ad. He was simply using the euphemism. Donald Trump responded on Truth Social saying, great job by Bret Baier in his interview with Lion Kamala Harris. She has a massive and irredeemable case of Trump derangement syndrome. So bad, in fact, that she is barely able to talk about any subject other than the man who had the best economy ever, the strongest border in history, and who just got the unanimous endorsement of the U.S. Border Patrol, me. Their endorsement was a tremendous honor. They said that Comrade Kamala did a terrible job, the absolute worst in memory, and can't be allowed to do it again. She is also the worst vice president in history, but hopefully soon will be gone. Again, congratulations to Bret Baier on a tough but very fair interview, one that clearly showed how totally incompetent Kamala is. For the good of our nation, her inferior cognitive ability must be tested at once. Wow. So the U.S. Border Patrol says that Kamala Harris can't be allowed to do it again. That seems kind of important. Believe what you like about on whose behalf Bret Baier is performing this takedown, but Donald Trump is making it clear in these statements and announcements that his hands are clean. He's got nothing to do with this. Bret Baier reportedly does not like Trump at all. In fact, he's a former Bush guy, and it's unlikely that Donald Trump has too much love or respect for Bret Baier. He simply said he was tough and fair. But regardless of Bret Baier, Trump has been going after Fox nonstop, especially recently. And that provides what my friend Burning Bright calls narrative shielding. Just this morning, Trump posted on Truth Social, why does Suzanne Scott of Fox News keep putting on third-rate talking heads like Jessica Tarlov, Richard Fowler, Patrick Murphy, Something Wolf, Keisha Lance Bottoms, and other radical left lunatics that lie and make up statements, with Fox rarely having any counter to their storytelling? It is so bad for winning the most important election in the history of our country. Likewise, not a moment goes by when I'm not looking at negative, false ads that the other camp stuffs the Fox airwaves with. If I win, and I hope for the country's sake that I do, and this radical left moron Kamala doesn't get a chance to run the country, it is despite Fox, not because of them. A few minutes later, he hit CBS News again. Why won't 60 Minutes release the fraudulent tapes of Lion Kamala's interview with them? Could it be because it was a complete and total disaster? Or that they, quote unquote, created many additional new answers for her, not just the one where she was so embarrassingly caught? In normal times, what happened on 60 Minutes, deceptively doctoring her answers, would be the end of anyone's campaign. Kamala is slow, incoherent, and is in no way qualified to be president of the United States. Release the tapes for the good of America. We can do it the nice way or the hard way. Now, there's a lot packed into that post. First and foremost, he just said she's in no way qualified to be president of the United States. Now, is that a euphemism about how fit she is for the job, how good a job she might be able to do? Or is he commenting on the fact that she is legitimately not qualified to be president according to the original intent of the Constitution? Hopefully, we'll still get to see that story play out, and that would loop in Barack Obama with it. He says we can do it the nice way or the hard way, and he's been talking about how CBS should lose their broadcasting license. I think we can make a pretty solid bet on hearing more about that in the future. But he also said that they, quote unquote, created many additional new answers for her, not just the one where she was so embarrassingly caught. And then he said that they were deceptively, quote unquote, doctoring her answers. Now, what I'm about to say is a conspiracy theory. These are baseless claims. But considering the presence of AI we've already seen in Kamabla's campaign, you have to wonder if he's not hinting about something more, something bigger. And it's funny because today an article appeared in The Intercept with the headline, "The Pentagon Wants to Use AI to Create Deepfake Internet Users." And I haven't gone all the way through this yet, but what I have read makes this sound like a limited hangout. Whatever they're telling us could happen on a technological level, we should assume is already happening. Their tech is so far ahead of where ours is. And if they have that tech, if they've developed that tech, they did it for a purpose so that they could use it. They're not just sitting on it, waiting to start using it when we do. We've seen what AI can do in movies. We're familiar with computer-generated imagery. I understand most people would see this implication as a stretch, but we just watched these people simply replace the quote-unquote sitting president on the ticket with Kamala Harris to participate in a fake campaign leading up to a fake election. Do we really need to pretend that the media wouldn't use AI to create different answers for Kamala Harris and simply air those? I don't know that that happened, but I can't put it past them. And to assume that they don't have the technological ability to do it, I think is wrong-headed. There aren't moral or ethical or legal boundaries for these people. There is nothing they won't do to hold on to power. Now, again, it's just a thought. Keep it in the back of your head. See if future events that emerge in reality map onto that understanding. See if Donald Trump keeps bringing it up. It sounds like we're going to get answers on that at some point. I can't imagine CBS is going to do it the easy way. Donald Trump loves to troll with this stuff. He often teases these narratives until they settle in the public consciousness and everyone is asking for resolution. And I assume that we'll get that resolution on whatever timeline has been prepared. I said the Kamabla interview was the big news of the morning, but they wiped that right off the front page around noon when they announced the potential death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. CNN's website was doing its live updates. That's what they do whenever they're going to roll a story out over time, making each update seem more and more serious. It further cements the underlying truth of the official story. Here were a series of headlines that CNN released. U.S. officials have long looked to Sinwar's eventual death as a key opportunity to end the Israel-Hamas war. Wow, and now it's finally happened. A peaceful resolution is just over the horizon. It won't take Donald Trump to create peace. We can just do it now. Sinwar hasn't been seen in more than a year. Wait, what? The guy wasn't around for more than a year, and it just so happens that he popped his head up right now and got killed less than 3 weeks before the most important election in the history of all worlds combined? What impeccable Incredible timing. And it is literally incredible. Like you can't possibly believe it. He was nowhere for a long time, and then all of a sudden the world's most dangerous terrorist leader was dead, just like Osama bin Laden, who may have been killed 13 years before Barack Obama came out interrupting Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals in the NBA to announce that they finally got him. Turns out he wasn't dead in 1998. He plotted 9/11, carried it out, and then hid in caves for a long time, and that house in Pakistan where they definitely killed him. No one had seen Sinwar for a year, but for sure they got him, and at the best possible time. Amazing. Let's go through a few more of these CNN headlines because they're really crafting the entire narrative here. No sign of harm to hostages during Gaza operation that may have killed Sinwar, Netanyahu says. Unconfirmed images purported to be of Hamas chief's body circulating on social media platforms. Aides passed U.S. Defense Secretary a note about Sinwar's potential death during NATO meeting, official says. And that's from Natasha Bertrand. She's the woman who wrote the Politico article on the letter from 51 former intelligence officials saying that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. Isn't that great? Israel will pursue and eliminate its enemies, defense minister says. U.S. intel is working to assess who may succeed Sinwar. How about that? They got to figure out who his replacement's going to be. It's unclear how Sinwar's apparent killing could impact hostage negotiations, officials say. Oh man, I thought we were going to save those hostages. I thought that's what this war was all about. Now we don't know what's going to happen with the hostages because we've taken out their leader. U.S. officials are not yet sure what Sinwar's apparent death would mean for the Israel-Hamas conflict. Wait a second. Apparent death? You just told me that pictures of his dead body were going around on social media. Oh, but wait, they're unconfirmed images, only purported to be of his body. So how apparent is his death? Is it like it's real apparent? Or you're just saying it's apparent enough times so that everyone believes it's real, and at that point it won't matter anymore whether or not it's real. And then I don't know how this headline got in there. 28 Palestinians killed in airstrike on school in northern Gaza, emergency services say. Whoops, I guess. I just remember back to when Russia was committing war crimes for being reported to have done things like that, even though the reports continued proving false. Apparent Sinwar death expected to be forefront of discussions during Biden's Berlin meetings, officials say. Israel confirms to U.S. Sinwar is dead, according to initial DNA testing. Oh man, that was fast. Just like when they confirmed it was bin Laden in this same exact way. Gosh, it's incredible how they do it. So this event interrupted Lloyd Austin's NATO meetings, and now it's going to be the centerpiece of Biden's discussions in Berlin as he really negotiates world peace. The fake President Joe Biden released an official statement on whitehouse.gov saying, among other things, shortly after the October 7th massacres, that's the paragliding go-kart incident, I directed special operations personnel and our intelligence professionals to work side by side with their Israeli counterparts to help locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders hiding in Gaza. With our intelligence help, the IDF relentlessly pursued Hamas's leaders, flushing them out of their hiding places and forcing them onto the run. There has rarely been a military campaign like this, with Hamas leaders living and moving through hundreds of miles of tunnels, organized in multiple stories underground, determined to protect themselves with no care for the civilians suffering above ground. Today, however, proves once again that no terrorists anywhere in the world can escape justice, no matter how long it takes. To my Israeli friends, this is no doubt a day of relief and reminiscence, similar to the scenes witnessed throughout the United States after President Obama ordered the raid to kill Osama bin Laden in 2011. How about that? Our 9/11 and Israel's 9/11 ending in exactly the same ways? Man, that's crazy, huh? I sure hope that we didn't conduct the war on terror the way Israel has conducted this, whatever it is, on Hamas or Gaza or Palestine or Hezbollah or Iran or Lebanon or whatever it is Israel is doing. I mean, honestly, who cares? Israel has the right to kill indiscriminately forever. Based on the paragliding go-kart incident, the television says that we have to agree with that. And because we're not anti-Semitic, we do agree. But man, I hope this Israel response isn't a parallel to our 9/11 response. I mean, sure, they call this Israel's 9/11. And in each case, we heard that the Uniparty took out the leader of those terrorists, even though he may have already been dead. The fake president's statement went on. Israel has every right to eliminate the leadership and military structure of Hamas. Hamas is no longer capable of carrying out another October 7th. Oh, well, I guess we can wrap it all up then. Hopefully, Israel has taken out their capacity to build paragliding go-karts. I will be speaking soon with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders to congratulate them, to discuss the pathway for bringing the hostages home to their families and for ending this war once and for all, which has caused so much devastation to innocent people. There is now the opportunity for the day after in Gaza, without Hamas in power, and for a political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Yahya Sinwar was an insurmountable obstacle to achieving all those goals. That obstacle no longer exists, but much work remains before us. And of course, they've been telling us that they will achieve a ceasefire for the entire time. That has not happened, somehow. But now, less than 3 weeks until the most important election in the history of all worlds combined, going all the way back to the very, very real Big Bang 14 zillion years ago, the chance for peace has finally arrived. Will they get it before the election? No, of course not. They'll keep telling their supporters it's just around the corner, and Benjamin Netanyahu will make it take forever. Now, the fake vice president doesn't want to be upstaged by the fake president, not at a moment like this, not after that interview last night. And so whoever is controlling Kamala Harris decided to put her out there in front of the country. Barack Obama interrupted the NBA's conference finals to give his very important announcement at the White House. And so the American people need to see whatever janky 2-bit Kamala Harris version of that they can muster.
Today, Israel confirmed that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is dead, and justice has been served. And the United States, Israel, and the entire world are better off as a result. Sinwar was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the victims of October 7 and hostages killed in Gaza. He had American blood on his hands. Today, I can only hope that the families of the victims of Hamas feel a sense and measure of relief. Sinwar was the mastermind of October 7, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. A terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people and included horrific sexual violence and more than 250 hostages taken into Gaza, including 7 Americans, living and deceased, who remain in captivity. A terrorist attack that triggered a devastating war in Gaza, a war that has led to unconscionable suffering of many innocent Palestinians and greater instability throughout the Middle East. In the past year, American special operations and intelligence personnel have worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders. And I commend their work. And I will say, to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
So Fox News went live to cover Kamala Harris giving that statement that she read at a podium. She was pretending to be the fake president. And the funny thing is that the more seriously she attempts to take herself, the more seriously they attempt to portray her, the less serious she seems. They are trying to bestow upon her the authority of the office of President of the United States of America. They're trying to make it seem like a sure thing, a done deal, a role that she has already filled so that people accept it. They feel like this thing is already happening, which makes them believe that Kamala Harris is capable of doing that job. She's announcing a success as though it's her own, leaving aside whatever likelihood there might be that it's not even real. There's no way in the world Kamala Harris had anything to do with it. But it's amazing how quickly they can give her this amazing achievement after that absolutely disastrous interview. Oh, well, I guess it's just a coincidence. It's just impeccable, incredible, unbelievable timing. But with that said, this article is kind of strange. This is the New York Post from today. Biden tells Obama, "She's not as strong as me." And ex-pres agrees, that's true, at Ethel Kennedy service. President Biden griped to former President Barack Obama that she is not as strong as me, with Obama agreeing that's true in a stunning off-mic conversation deciphered for the Post by a professional lip reader. The apparent candid assessment of Vice President Kamala Harris's standing going into the November 5th election occurred Wednesday afternoon as America's two most recent Democrat presidents conversed at Ethel Kennedy's memorial service in Washington. "She's not as strong as me," said Biden, 81, according to the translation, which was produced by analyzing the on-video lip movements during the discussion. So it's basically science. "I know, that's true," the popular former president agreed, adding, "We have time." "Yeah, we'll get it in time," said Biden, who was forced by fellow Democrats to relinquish the party's nomination in favor of Harris on July 21st, in a mutiny that Obama was believed to support. Moments earlier, Obama said, "It's important that we have some time together," in a possible reference to campaigning alongside Harris. Democrat sources were divided when asked about the translation, with some saying they believe it was an honest take on the state of the 2024 race, and others expressing such strong disbelief that they questioned the accuracy of the script. From the outset, there has been widespread concern that Harris was not a strong alternative to Biden, who clearly was a sinking ship. So much so that multiple House members floated the idea of an open convention or removing Harris from the ticket along with Biden, said one Democrat source. Biden spokesperson Andrew Bates scoffed. "A lip-reading expert? Did your usual right-wing soothsayer have their out of office up? Only President Biden and President Obama know what they discussed, but this certainly wasn't it." A source close to Obama didn't deny the translation, but said, "Only President Obama and President Biden know what they discussed yesterday. Any assertion otherwise is ridiculous." Well, that's some very fine messaging coordination. Now, we've been talking the entire time about the chances that Kamala could be replaced. Again, these people have no legal or ethical considerations that matter at all. They're not concerned about the rules of elections. They're not concerned about the Constitution. They operate within their own system. They don't require any of it to be real. All they need is the propaganda media to destroy the reputations of their enemies, to support them and defend them anytime they need it. They need the ability to wage economic warfare, to debank people, to apply sanctions, or alternatively, to incentivize whoever they want to do whatever they need done. And if all that fails, they need true forcing mechanisms like corrupt or compromised police departments, federal law enforcement, and various military organizations like UN peacekeeping missions and NATO. The only thing that stops them is if those weapons fail or those weapons are taken away. And it seems like we're watching both. Think about Kamala Harris's meltdown. It was all about Donald Trump turning the military against the American people. Is she suggesting that the military is on Donald Trump's side, would be on Donald Trump's side in a situation like that? How else could that sort of panic be justified, particularly when she's intentionally misstating what Donald Trump actually said? They don't have any legal boundaries or ethical boundaries. Their boundaries appear and disappear based on how effectively they are able to deploy that particular set of weapons. And it doesn't seem to be working anymore because it's all becoming too obvious now. And we want it to be obvious. Replacing a failing Kamala Harris with an already failed Joe Biden, or anyone else for that matter, is not going to help them. It only makes them look that much more illegitimate. And if we can shift our focus from groveling and trembling over whoever the television might tell us is our new God King, and pay attention to the fact that this is a fifth generational World War III that must be won, we would realize that all of this works toward our benefit. And if they replace Kamala Harris with Joe Biden, who no one wants, and then the TV says the fake president, Joe Biden, actually got the 107 million votes to Donald Trump's 71, the game would be over. But people don't want that. They're scared of that because they want the TV to tell them Donald Trump won. We can't be scared of winning. The tables were turned in that interview on Kamala Harris, and the reaction encouraged by regime media is to think about the difference this makes in fake polls leading up to a fake election. The purpose here is to prove the corruption. It is to expose the system. We need to be comfortable with that sort of chaos because there is more ahead. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.